Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me for episode 14 of Friday Book Bites. I can't believe we've been doing this for 14 weeks now. What a crazy year it has been. Today I am joined by podcaster Rosemary Puddy from the Book Podcast. Hi Rosemary, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Actually, your little box down the bottom there said you're backstage. Oh, it felt like I was at the Oscars or the Logies or something.
Excellent. I don't know what happens on your side, so there you go. So maybe you need to send me, what do they call them, a rider, which tells me what you need in that green room, only blue M&Ms. And
absolutely. Bottles of champagne, chocolate. Chocolate's always, so.
Always. There you go. Thank you for joining me today, Rosemary. We're going to have a chat about your podcast, which is called The Book Podcast, and why you're focusing on Australian women writers. And you've recently gone through a rebrand. So we're going to have a chat about that as well. But before we do, I'm going to put up the details of today's giveaway because otherwise I forget to do it. So for anyone who leaves a comment or asks a question today, you will go into the draw to win a copy of one of my favourite books of all time, The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. And of course, as we were just discussing, some chocolates, because what's life without chocolates? So, anyone who makes a comment can go in the draw for that. And Cassie just... Sorry, what was that, Rose?
Can I comment and get chocolates?
Yeah, of course. Why not?
No rider.
All right. So you have a very popular podcast, Rosemary, called The Book Podcast.
Yeah.
And you have a focus on Australian women writers. Can I just ask you, what was your impetus to start this podcast focusing on Australian women writers?
Well, it sort of started a little bit before the podcast. I went and did a workshop for a local community radio station, and I liked that, and I sat in on a program for a little while, and I did have it was like a little book club on a Friday, and I did that for a few weeks, and I was actually doing most of the recording from home and just sending the files up. But through all sorts of, mishaps and things, I decided that maybe I could just do it from home. And then I've been listening to podcasts, and I thought, yeah, that's an idea. If I'm just doing it from home anyway, I'll start my own little podcast. And then I thought, well, I need a niche. I need something, that's going to differentiate me from any of the others. And so I've been reading about the Stella Prize. And back then, it's 3 years ago, the podcast has been going for 3 years now, or 3.5 years. And I was reading about it, and it was saying, the paucity of reviews for women writers in Australia. It's gotten better. It's not parity, but it's gotten better. But back then, it was just awful. There weren't anybody. It was hardly any women writers that were getting any reviews at all, unless they were way up there on the scale of things, and commanded a big audience. And I thought, that's it. That's my niche. I'll do Australian women writers, and I'll do fiction and non-fiction because, I just thought that would be an opportunity to have a little niche. So I'm not looking for thousands and thousands of listeners, although I think I've got a few, but not quite that many. But I'm actually more interested in having it as a niche podcast. So anybody that is interested in Australian women writers will come along and listen to the podcast.
Yeah, excellent. I have a small graphic here, and this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the types of authors that you interview. I just took this from the last few episodes that you had. You cover every genre possible within women's writers. And as you said, you've been going for about 3.5 years now. In all of that experience, what to you makes a great author interview?
First of all, I would say you just have to make sure, to begin with, you have a little chat and you make them comfortable to start with, because when you're an author, I'm not an author, but as you are, Sandy, you write away, you scribble away, you type away, all on your own. It's quite solitary. And then when your book actually gets to be published, all of a sudden this PR marketing machine sort of whirs up, and you're expected to be your own marketer, your own PR person, and it's daunting. It's really daunting. So, if I have a little chat first and we make them comfortable, I often ask, and I don't know if people think, oh God, she always asks that, but I often ask about their background, where they went to school, what books they liked to read when they were a child, just a little bit about stuff that they don't even have to think about. It's, where I grew up, what things I loved, and things that influenced them back then. So once you've done that, then once you actually launch into the interview, they're a little bit more relaxed. But the number one thing I think for an interviewer is read the book. Seriously, I mean, I don't know how people interview anybody that writes a book without reading the book. And I think there've been interviews where people don't read the book, and that's fine if that's what they want to do, but I wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, I'd like to read the book. I like to know exactly what's going on, their thought behind it, what sparked that little, interest in it, what made them think about, wow, that would make a great story. So, yes, make them comfortable and read the book.
Yeah, I have not through a podcast. I've only been on 4 podcasts before yours, of course, and Claudine Tennellis's Talking Aussie Books, and Rights for Women with Pamela Cook, and Danny V's Words and Nerds podcast. And my experience on podcasts has been fantastic. Radio interviews, however, I have had people interview me where it is very, very obvious that they haven't even read the back of the book, let alone the whole book. And so as the author, you do know when the interviewer has read your book. So thank you on behalf of the authors that you do interview, because it is very obvious when you interview us, you ask such insightful and intelligent questions, and it does put us at ease. It's You can't. I couldn't interview anybody without having read the book and read it thoroughly. And of course, often because I have to read so many books, I'm doing 1 a week, sometimes 2 a week. It used to be last year. I've call that back a little bit now, because it's quite a lot of work, and I'm sure Claudine Tennellis and Danny and all of those have told you that it's actually quite a lot of work behind the scenes before you even get to talk to an author. So yes, reading the book and doing a little bit of research on the author as well. I mean, it's amazing what you can find when you Google people, and sometimes you can find little quirky things that if you drop that into an interview, that people go, oh my goodness, how do you know that? So it's a bit of fun. Try to keep it a bit of fun. It makes us feel like you know us, which puts us at ease, because it's funny, when you were backstage before, we were having a chat before we went live, and you were saying that you were nervous to come on, as at the other end of the microphone, so to speak. And I know when I interviewed Danny a few weeks ago, she said the same thing. And I said to you the same thing you always say to your authors, just a chat. We're just having a chat. I think for any of us, though, to speak about the things that we're passionate about, even though we know about them, it can be quite daunting to do.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. This is the very first time for me that I've been interviewed, and first live interview too, first video one. So it was like, oh my gosh. Just completely, lose your audience.
So even if you don't make a comment and win the chocolates, maybe I should send you some chocolates anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Calm the nerves. That would be good.
And I totally agree with Vanessa's comment that you are a wonderful interviewer.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah, it shows in your interviewing how passionate you are about Australian women writers, which is really nice. I'm just looking at a comment here from Yvonne. She has loved meeting so many authors on the podcast, and new authors and new books. Is that why you're doing it, Rose, to introduce readers to new authors that maybe they wouldn't find otherwise?
Absolutely, Sandy, because when I started and I looked up the Stella Prize thing, and I thought, okay, that'll be my little niche. And I thought, okay, Australian women writers. Now I'm old, so I've been collecting books for a long, long time. So I've got a room upstairs that's, a little bedroom, and it's just wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling books. So I thought, I'll go upstairs and see how many Australian women writers I've actually bought over the years. It was sad. It was more than it was. I had an old Colleen McCulloch. I had a couple of Geraldine Brooks. Really, I think it was less than 6. So it was just like, wow. And to go into bookshops, and I don't know whether this is, and I think it has gotten better, to go into bookshops, they're promoting you a little bit more. You're more front and centre, I think, Australian women writers than they ever used to be. And also as well, and I think with a lot of readers, you get stuck in a genre, you get stuck in a niche, and you only read, you read quite narrowly. So this has been great for me, as well as, Yvonne finding new authors to read and love. I have too. So, it's been a fantastic thing for me. So it's been a big learning curve, but I've found lots and lots of authors I probably would never have found otherwise.
And as you said, there are so many Australian women writers at the moment. that are A, being published, and B, doing it very, very well. It's fantastic to have this avenue to get that message out there, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Debbie has made a comment that COVID has introduced her to an addiction to podcasts. And many more books on her bedside table. I won't tell you how many of these behind me I have not read yet.
I know. It's so Cassie Hamer, who's on the podcast with me now, who's absolutely fabulous, says to me, I've just got to get a bigger bedside table, just to keep all the books. But yes, I've got, like you, so many on the bookshelves that I've yet to get to.
Exactly. Now, over the winter, you had a bit of a rebrand for your podcast. It was a fabulous podcast to begin with. Why did you feel that you needed to do a bit of a rebrand?
I think I'd been doing it nonstop for 3 years, and then COVID hit, and I thought, well, this will give me a good time. Initially, it was I would redo the website because I hadn't really done anything with that, and it was a bit unwieldy, and there were too many pages and all those sorts of things that you. Once you're a bit further down the track, you go, oh yeah, I can do a little bit better than that. And then while I was doing that, I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to have a real think about where I want this to go and what I want it to do. So I did that, and I reran older episodes of some really good interviews that had happened, great authors that had happened over the past 3 years. And then I was just talking, I think probably to yourself and to Cassie, and I was saying, I'd probably like a book review, a book of the month, and somebody with me to chat about it. And Cassie, God love her, put her hand up and said, yes, I'll do that with you. And I'm so glad she did. She's so good. And so we chose a book, which was, the first one was last week, which was The Mother Fault. We're just going to do it once a month, the last Tuesday in every month. So that was one segment. And that got me thinking, well, maybe I could expand that a little bit. So Cassie also agreed to come on and do like news and publishing news and what was happening in the publishing world here and around the world. And I always, like all of us, we love going into bookshops, and we can't go into bookshops at the moment. So I thought, well, I'll have a tiny little segment and I'll ring around bookshops around Australia and have a little chat about what's happening in their neck of the woods and what's going out the door. So still keeping the focus on Australian women writers. That's first and foremost the focus. Yeah. So that was sort of a slow process. There were about 4 to 6 weeks. I thought about it, thought, how am I going to do this? And decided we'd go live on the 1st of August, which we did. And Cassie's been on board from day one. Oh, and also I decided I'd have a little, because often I'll get comments and things on social media about little writing tips. What writing tips did your authors say? What do they think about this, that, and the other? So I thought I'll have a very short writing tips segment, and I was very, very lucky. Pamela Freeman, who also writes as Pamela Hart, she wrote The Desert Nurse and lots of other books. She's fabulous. She's also the writing director at the Australian Writers' Centre. So I rang her and I said, would you like to be my first writing expert on my writing class? And it's just a very short segment. We just do, just short, sharp little bits of tips. And she came on board. She said, yes, she'd love to. And she did that for the whole of August. And now I've got Lee Kaufman for September, and I've got somebody else for October. So it's been, and so it all came together, more, I suppose, more magazine style than just a straight interview style, if you like. But it's made it obviously a lot longer. It's now double the length that it was. So okay. I don't know. At this stage, I don't think that's a problem, because initially I thought I'll keep it under around about half an hour for commuters. You're on the train, the bus, car, you can listen. But now no one's commuting, or nobody's commuting too much. So I thought, well, it's okay at the moment. And if it proves that it's too long, I might split it into 2 and do, 2 a week instead of the 1 a week. But it's a work in progress. It's very new because we've only been doing that now for the month.
Yeah. And it's obviously working. Jodie Gibson has commented that she's loving the new format of the podcast, and she's glad it is back. And Vanessa Carnival also is loving the new format. I think it's fantastic that you are celebrating bookshops as part of the new format. Like everybody in the arts industry, they are suffering at the moment, like so many other industries as well. So a little shout out to them, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's a Cassie and I have talked about this on the podcast over the last couple of weeks about how really important initiatives aren't going to be funded anymore because of the arts funding cutbacks. And this is a real shame.
Yeah, it is. And that's a whole nother story we could get into with the New South Wales Writers Centre just losing their funding, which is heartbreaking. I know that both Cassie and I have been through there as, aspiring writers. So, so thank you for including the bookshops in that. Cheryl has a question for you, Rose, from Mansfield in Victoria. Can you tell her some of the Australian women writers you've interviewed recently?
Recently, okay, well, I've got a whole array of books here, but yes, there's Kirsty Manning, who writes fabulous historical fiction. She's coming up in the next few weeks with her new book, The Lost Jewels, which is a real story. It's actually based on a real story, which is a huge cache of really, really beautiful jewels was found on an excavation when they were doing rebuilding in London just before the First World War, and she's based her story on that. That's a really fascinating story. The Mother Fault, of course, is going to be coming up. That's the one that we dissected last week with Cassie. The Tiniest House of Time with Sridhar Iyer, which is about the untold stories of the Indian diaspora. So that's really fascinating. Let me see, what else have I got? Oh, Mirandi Rewo is with the Stone Sky Gold Mountain, and that's about it's about the gold rush, but we all know about the gold rush in Ballarat, but this is the gold rush up in Queensland, and it's about two siblings, two Chinese siblings that come over to work the gold fields, and that's really, it's heartbreaking and sad, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. Oh gosh, there are so many, isn't it? I've had to get my little thing there. I mean, because I talked to Vanessa McCausland recently about The Lost Summer of Driftwood, and that's a beautiful, beautiful story, very gentle and lovely, great setting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to all of the books, because Cassie and I have talked about August is a pretty lean month for new books coming out, new releases. But September, it's just sort of like a tsunami of books that's going to come out. So there's a lot of people that I want to talk to. But so it's good. And just to go way back to when I very first started, crime books weren't a huge, Australian women writing crime weren't a huge thing. But for this last 3 years, there are so many women writing crime and so good at it as well. You know, we've got a wonderful Dervla McTiernan, who I've talked to a couple of times. She's just warm and wonderful to talk to. She's just great. We've got Candice Fox, who's doing really well, and she co-writes as well with James Patterson. We've got, Sarah Bailey, who does all of her. She's got a whole series of books. Into the Night, I think, was the last one. And Emma Viskick, who's got a really fascinating detective. He's deaf, so to have to write that as a deaf detective, it's really fascinating. She's really, really clever. That's a very, very good crime stories.
Excellent. Cassie's got a comment here about how much time independent book podcasters invest into their podcasts week after week, and you get no payment, and it's a true labour of love, and it absolutely is. Given that you read such a wide range of genres, fiction and non-fiction, do you have a favourite genre that you like to read?
I used to. I don't anymore. It's so wide now. I mean, and I don't choose the books specifically on genre because, as I said, it's broadened my horizons with what's out there. So, doing the podcast, yes, it is a labour of love. But I think if you're a writer or if you're a bookshop owner, as well as being anything to do with literature, really, you're never going to be a millionaire. It's not that sort of thing. It's not the sort of thing that you go into to go, oh, I'm going to be rich and famous. No, you're not. But it is so wonderful to meet the authors that I've met and to read the fabulous stories and the works that they do. It's just, it is a labour of love. Yes, but it's hours and hours of work every week.
Snap with Jodie, who asked the exact same question, do you have a favourite genre? Now that you have broadened your horizons, and I'm just going to throw this at you, sorry for not warning you, Rose. Is there a genre that has surprised you that you didn't think you would like, but now that you've had your horizons open, you actually do enjoy?
Absolutely. Magic realism. I'm just fascinated with magic realism. Yeah, Tabitha Bird's A Lifetime of Impossible Days. There's a whole slew of magic realism books that I've read since doing the podcast, and I just love them. And I would, if somebody had said that to me, I would have thought, no, I don't think really that's my genre. There's very few genres I haven't covered in the podcast. I don't think I've covered science fiction. Science fact I have, but not science fiction. That sort of seems remote for me. But fantasy, I've covered a little bit of fantasy, speculative fiction, and the Mother Fault with Kate Mildenhall. Well, it was dystopian when she wrote it. Not quite so much now. It's scary now, what she's written and how things have come to pass. But so a little bit dystopian fiction, but definitely magic realism is the one that's really surprised me.
Yeah, interesting. And just goes to show that it's worth giving a different genre a try, because you never know what it might do for you.
Yeah, and I think Cassie was only talking to me last week about she's got a little bit of a sweet soft spot for YA books, and I have covered a couple of YA books, and they're really good as well. Really fascinating, really good, great stories. Yeah. And also, novellas. I'd never have picked up a novella before, and that can be sort of all sorts of genres. But some novellas that I've done on the podcast have been, again, Miranda Rewo. She wrote The Fish Girl, which was a take on Somerset Maugham's, I think, The Four Dutchmen, and then was Murmurations, which I did on the first week in August this month, in the new segment, and Angela Meyer's Joan Smokes, which is set in Las Vegas, which is an absolutely wonderful novella. So different things that you find that you weren't expecting to find.
Absolutely. Cheryl is agreeing with you about Tabitha Bird's Lifetime of Impossible Days, that she found it wonderful as well. Vanessa's got a question regarding this magic realism genre. I'm not sure whether you'd be able to answer it or not. Do you have any other authors in that genre that you would like to read?
Vanessa, to be quite honest, no, I've read a few, not all Australian ones. I don't know Sarah Addison Allen, to be quite honest with you, so I don't know her books. Obviously, if you've read Tabitha's, that's fantastic. Erin Morgenstern wrote The Night Circus, which is a lot of magic realism in that. That was great. But she's written a second one. Her second one came out earlier this year, and it's quite different. I mean, I think The Night Circus had mega sales and mega following, but this one is really quite different. It's very convoluted. It's still beautifully written, but it doesn't quite have the same arc as The Night Circus, the same story line as that. But no, sorry, Vanessa, I couldn't really recommend anyone at the moment, and I don't know Sarah Addison Allen.
Well, there you go. So Vanessa's saying she'll have to check out Tabitha. I would agree with that as well. If you're keen on trying magic realism, that would be a good one. Now, I may have stolen Jodie Gibson's question about which was her favourite genre, but Michelle Parsons has stolen my next question, so I'll let her take credit for this.
Okay.
Who would be your dream interview, living or dead? Somebody that you haven't interviewed already, I'm going to ask.
Okay. Australian or not Australian, or it doesn't really matter, I suppose.
I'd say open slather.
I think I'd love to talk to Hilary Mantel. I think her trilogy that started with Wolf Hall is just amazing, absolutely amazing. And I think it's won the Booker twice, hasn't it? So past. Well, of course, the Austen Girls. You know, there's a whole people that you think, oh yes, I'd really like to talk to them. Yeah, that's a tricky question, isn't it? And I do know that, you know, dream interviews and Michelle, just to sort of answer your question sort of a bit obscurely, is that there are so many books that come out now every year, and I only really are doing one a week. So there are so many that I would like to, and I really feel bad that I can't get to all of them and get to all of the fabulous Australian writers that we've got there. So, yeah, living or dead, Hilary Mantel, the Austen Girls, Brontes. I think the classics. I think if you go back to the classics and you have a chat with them, that would be fascinating.
It would be. With so much choice out there, as you said, you can't get to all of them. How do you decide which ones you are going to do for the podcast?
I try each week not to follow the same, if you like, genre or same theme. So, and I don't put in too many non-fiction books. there are some great ones there, but I don't seem to get too many of those that get sent to me. So really, it's basically to mix it up each week. So it's, when you get the blurb and you read it and you think, yeah, that would be that's a really interesting book to read and a really interesting author to talk to. So that's basically, there's no real tried and true way of how I choose it. It's basically to make it so that I'm not just doing a love story, or I'm not just doing a crime story. I'm just trying to mix it up as we go along.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, because you're going to cover many more readers that way. Your audience is going to grow and expand if you're covering so many different genres.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as Leanne said, we're so lucky to have so many great Australian writers. Vanessa's got a really interesting question. I wish I could bring her into the chat live to discuss this 3 ways. Sorry, not Vanessa. I've pulled the wrong one up.
Just on what you were just saying then about talented women writers, when I did start and I had a look at what my niche was going to be, and I read about the Stella Prize and how women weren't really very well represented in reviews and things like that, the first thing I thought of was, maybe they're not very good. Maybe there's not very many of them. Maybe that's why. And of course, it couldn't be further from the truth. And in the 3 years that I've been doing the podcast, the number of women writers coming through just seems to be growing and growing and growing. And the number of debut authors that put out a book that's absolutely gobsmacking, it's just floors me that they're so good straight off the mark. I mean, look, it could have taken 10 years to write the book, but that's, their debut novel is just sensational.
I can almost guarantee that it probably did take 10 years to write that first one. A lot goes on before we ever hit the shelves, I can assure you of that. Sorry, it was Chrissy's question that I pulled up the wrong question. It's here from Chrissy. Chrissy is a writer, and she's saying that we're told that magical realism is not encouraged when we're submitting our work to publishers. Do we think that Tabitha Bird might have opened the door to aspiring writers in this genre? It's a very interesting question, Chrissy.
I think that she possibly has, and she's got a new book. I think it's coming out next year, isn't it? She's written it, and I think it's at the editing stages at the moment.
Yeah.
A cover. But yes, absolutely. I think that sometimes you just have to have a trailblazing book like that opens the doors where people go, oh, people really want to read that. We had no idea that that was something that people like to read. And I mean, like me, I've come across it quite by chance from doing the podcast. So I would have gone into a store had COVID not been around and seen Tabitha's book, because the cover's beautiful as well. So, and that's what draws you first to a book. But yes, most definitely, I think she's trailblazing in that magic realism. Although there have been magic realism books, for decades and centuries. But in this environment, yes, she's really opened the door to that. And it was such a great book.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes publishers don't know what they want until they get it.
Yeah.
So this maybe is either on a course or a forum, because I used to go to lots of forums before I was published as well, to try to get as much advice and information as you can. And there are, rules. Never write in dual point of view as a debut writer. And as you know, Rose, all of my books are multiple points of view. I broke all of those rules that they tell you on those forums. And I think that as a writer, you have to write what's in your heart, whether it's the trend of the moment or not, because you never know when that one book is going to capture the publisher's imagination. And look what's happened with Tabitha.
Yeah, and I think with Tabitha too, although it's not by any stretch of the means autobiographical, but there's an awful lot of Tabitha in that book. She's brought all of her past and her emotions and things that have happened to her. She's actually distilled into that story.
Yeah, and that's what we have to do as writers. There would be no point in me trying to write a book like Tabitha's. That's just not who I am. It's not within me. We have to write what's inside of ourselves, regardless of what we think the publishers will or won't pick up, I think.
Sorry, you said that, and most writers, it's not... it's a long journey. It's a long journey to write a book. So when you're actually writing it and you're writing it from your heart and soul, you don't know if that's what the publishers are going to want when you actually finally, get an agent or get in front of a publisher. It's a really hard road, isn't it, being a writer?
It is, and it just proves you can't write to a trend. You know, when Twilight became a big thing, all the authors got on the vampire bandwagon. But it's such a slow process. You know, it took me 18 years to find a publisher. What was in trend 18 years ago is not what's in trend right now. So it has to come from the heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tabitha's new book, as Cheryl is commenting, is called The Emporium of Imagination. And yes, it's due out next year. And Cassie is saying she would classify Trent Dalton's Boy Swallows universe as magical realism.
Yeah, actually, that's true. Yes, it is. And of course, I mean, that was like a juggernaut, wasn't it? You know, Boy Swallows universe. It's just a fantastic book, and it won everything. And it's just, and I'm interested to read his next book, All the Shimmering Skies, because I believe that's set when. I think it's set in Darwin, isn't it? Something to do with when Darwin was bombed. I think it's set up. Yeah.
And I think just based on the blurb, because that's the only thing I've read so far, because it's not out yet, it sounds even more like it's going into that magical realism. It's a little bit different to what he did.
Well, I loved Boy Swallows universe. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, I'm just putting up a little personal comment here, just from someone who's been with me from the very beginning, from Adrian, who's saying hi, that she and Carrie are watching in the school canteen today. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Don't burn those chicken goujons, though. Oh dear. I'm glad my days in the canteen are gone now that Emily's in high school. And Dardie is just making a comment that she is loving these chats as an aspiring author. I'm so glad you are enjoying them. I'm just checking to see whether I've got any other comments here that I've missed. There's one here from Shell that I've missed. And this is a good question for you, Rose, given how much you read. How on earth do you remember to correctly match the authors and their books and don't get them mixed up?
I write a lot of notes. No, I don't get the. I'm not too bad with that. But sometimes I get flummoxed with, who's written what. Or I could remember the title but not the author, or I can remember the author but not the title. So Michelle, I think we all do that a little bit. It's to do with getting older, I think, for me.
I think you'd be fantastic in the bookshop though, when that person comes in and says, "Oh, I'm looking for a book. It's got a blue cover." You'd be able to answer that, I think, Rose.
There is a book called that. I'm looking for a book. It's got a blue cover. I've got it on the shelf behind me. It's very funny. Yeah. Bookstore people. I mean, bookstore people that work in bookstores are just fantastic. They're just wonderful, and they must get those sorts of questions all the time. Ridiculous sort of questions, but they can do it. They do it. They pull things out and they go, "Yes, this is the one. This is what you're thinking of." And but it's because bookstores have been a little bit limited at the moment. But when you go into a bookstore, I'm always just completely overwhelmed with the number of people writing. It's just huge, absolutely huge. And the new, they have the table down the middle with all the new releases and everything. And I'm like, wow, all these people writing fabulous books. You just can't get to all of them. That's the problem.
Yeah. Janine, who is a librarian down in Victoria, has said that she hates questions like that and she gets them all the time in the library as well. But I bet you can answer them, Janine, because you know your stuff.
Yes, I bet Janine can. Janine's been a follower of the podcast, I think, almost from day one. Hi, Janine. It's lovely to have you along. It's lovely to have you on the podcast.
Oh dear, and Jo has just joined us in her lunch break. Thank you for joining us, Jo. All right, I am conscious of taking up too much of your time, Rose, so I'm going to start wrapping it up. Before we do that, any last questions for Rose, please pop them in the comments now. I'm just going to put up your contact details, Rose, so people can find you, your website, your Facebook page, and your Instagram page. How is it best for people to listen to your podcasts?
Well, they can listen from the website at, thebookpodcast.com. I'm on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, Stitcher. That you can actually listen wherever you get your podcasts, whatever platform that you use to get podcasts. It's on a myriad of different platforms. So, and if you can't find it through your iPhone or your other phones, you can do it on the website. Listen there.
Excellent. And Tracy has just left a comment that she loves the people who work at her bookstore because they make recommendations for her. It's nice when you have that personal relationship, isn't it?
It is, yes. Your local bookstore is just fabulous. Like your local library as well. They're fabulous too. What would we do at libraries?
It's probably a bit of a worry, though, if they start pulling out a book before you've even walked in the door because you're in there so often. But that may not be such a good thing.
They've got a whole pile behind the counter going, these are for you.
Oh, dear. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rose. Who is on next week's podcast, just in case people want to chime in next week?
Next week, we've got crime, and it's a debut author again, honestly fantastic. Her name is Catherine Firkin. She's a Melbourne girl, but she's been working in New York as she's a journalist, so she's back here at the moment, but she's about to go back to New York to cover the elections with Trump and Biden, so that will be interesting. Her book's called Sticks and Stones, and it's a crime book, a serial killer style book, police procedural. It's very, very good. Yeah, so I highly recommend that.
Excellent. Crime is something I am just discovering, so that might be one to look out for. Yeah. All right, thank you so much for joining me, Rose, and thank you to everybody who joined us here live. Yvonne has read Catherine's book and loved it. There you go. So there's a second recommendation for it. Yep. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. It's supposed to be beautiful weather, at least here on the east coast of New South Wales. So fingers crossed we get some beautiful sunshine. And everybody take care, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much, Rose.
Thank you. Bye-bye.